Detective Griffith explained it was the only way to take down the whole operation and save other victims. Meanwhile, the mother was dealing with her own problems as the police department opened an internal investigation into her old cases, since she'd been a cop before. She had to sit through hours of questioning about whether she'd ever seen signs of this criminal ring during her time on the force. The investigators went through every arrest she'd made and every report she'd filed looking for connections, but she cooperated completely and answered everything. All she wanted was to focus on getting better and being there for her daughter who needed her more than ever after everything they'd been through. Social services finally approved the girl to go back home with her mom, but only under strict supervision with weekly check-ins and mandatory therapy sessions. They moved into a smaller apartment near the hospital where the mother could continue her physical therapy for the injuries from being tied up so long. The girl helped her mom with exercises every morning before school, and they started going to family counseling twice a week to work through the trauma together. The counselor taught them breathing exercises and grounding techniques for when the memories got too strong, which happened a lot at first. 5 weeks after everything started, the police got a tip that Sophia was at a Greyhound station trying to buy a ticket to Mexico under a fake name. Security cameras showed her wearing a wig and sunglasses, but the crescent tattoo on her wrist gave her away when she handed over cash for the ticket. Police surrounded the bus just as she was boarding and found 3 fake IDs in her purse along with $8,000 in cash wrapped in rubber bands. She fought them and tried to run, but they tackled her right there on the platform, while other passengers recorded everything on their phones. The preliminary hearing started 2 months later, and I had to testify about everything I saw and knew, which meant facing my husband in court for the first time since his arrest. I wore my most professional outfit and kept my voice steady even when his lawyer tried to make me look like I was lying about not knowing anything. My husband sat at the defense table in a suit that didn't fit right anymore since he'd lost weight in jail and kept trying to catch my eye. I told the court about finding the money in our garage and seeing him at the mall with the girl, and how he'd lied about being at work that day. The prosecutor showed security footage and phone records that backed up everything I said while my husband just stared at his hands on the table. After my testimony, I was walking to the parking garage when my husband's mother grabbed my arm and begged me to visit him in jail. I pulled away and kept walking, but then my husband himself called out from where guards were leading him back to holding after the hearing. He said he was sorry, and that he never meant for any of this to happen, but his apology was all about how hard this was for him. He talked about his debts and his fear, and how Sophia had manipulated him, but never once mentioned the mother tied up in that storage unit, or the little girl hiding alone in a car for 3 days. I turned my back on him and walked away while he kept yelling that he loved me until the guards dragged him through the doors. Sophia's preliminary hearing was the next week, and her lawyer was much more aggressive than my husband's had been about attacking the evidence. He argued that the storage unit receipt could have been planted, and that the witness identifications were unreliable since the girl was traumatized and I was biased. The judge threw out 2 of the lesser charges for lack of direct evidence, but kept the kidnapping and conspiracy charges that could still get her 20 years. Sophia sat there the whole time with no expression on her face, like none of this mattered to her at all, which made me even angrier. After all the court stuff, I finally started seeing a therapist because I couldn't sleep and kept having panic attacks whenever I saw men who looked like my husband. The therapist's office had soft lighting and a white noise machine, but I still felt exposed talking about how stupid I felt for not knowing who I'd married. Some nights I'd wake up at 3 in the morning convinced I heard him trying to get in, even though I knew he was locked up. The therapist taught me to journal when I couldn't sleep, and slowly the nightmares started happening less often, though they never went away completely. The girl went back to the school a month after reuniting with her mom, but it was really hard for her to adjust to normal kid stuff again. Loud noises made her panic, and she couldn't handle being in crowded hallways between classes, so they gave her permission to leave 5 minutes early. Her teacher told me she was using the coping skills from therapy like counting to 10 and focusing on her breathing when things got overwhelming. She even started making friends with a quiet girl who sat with her at lunch and didn't ask questions about why she sometimes had to leave suddenly. Detective Griffith called me one afternoon while I was packing boxes in my bedroom and told me the girl's mother needed work. He knew someone at a security company downtown who was hiring for desk work and wondered if I could drive her to the interview since she still didn't have a car. I picked her up the next morning and she wore the only nice outfit she had left, a black blazer that hung loose on her frame after everything she'd been through. The security company was in a plain office building near the courthouse, and the manager seemed nice enough when he shook her hand. She got the job that same day, starting part-time at minimum wage, but it was something. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers finally came through and I signed them at my kitchen table without crying. The apartment I found across town was half the size of our old house, but the rent was cheap and the neighbors kept to themselves. I packed our wedding photos into a cardboard box and shoved it in the back of the closet where I wouldn't have to look at them. The china we got as wedding gifts went to Goodwill along with the matching towels and the stupid throw pillows he picked out. Moving day came and I loaded everything into a rental truck by myself because I didn't want anyone's pity or help. The new place smelled like fresh paint and had water stains on the ceiling, but it was mine alone. 3 months after everything happened, an envelope showed up at my new address with the girl's handwriting on it. Inside was an invitation to her birthday party, the one they'd been shopping for when everything went wrong. The party was at a park near their new apartment and only 5 kids showed up, but everyone seemed genuinely happy. The girl wore a new Pokemon shirt and her mom had made a homemade cake that leaned to one side. They sang happy birthday and the girl blew out her candles in one breath like she'd been practicing. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered thank you, and I had to blink hard to keep from crying in front of everyone. A week later, another envelope arrived. This one from the state prison where my husband was being held. His handwriting looked shaky and the letter went on for 3 pages about his gambling debts and how scared he'd been of the people he owed money to. He wrote about how Sophia had promised him quick cash, and how he'd convinced himself nobody would really get hurt. I read it once standing by my mailbox, then walked straight to the dumpster and threw it away without responding. The trial dates kept getting pushed back, but finally 6 months after that day at the mall, the sentences came down. Sophia got 8 years with possibility of parole in 5, and my husband got his plea deal time of 15 years. The girl and her mom had moved into their own apartment by then with help from victim services and some nonprofit that helped crime survivors. The mom was working full-time hours at the security company and had even gotten a small raise after her boss saw how reliable she was. I was working 2 jobs myself, cashier at Target during the day and stocking shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. My back hurt constantly, and I fell asleep standing up sometimes, but the bills were getting paid without his income. The girl texted me pictures sometimes of her school projects or her cat they'd gotten from the shelter. She was doing better in the school, and her grades were mostly B's now that she could focus without being scared all the time. Detective Griffith stopped by the Target where I worked one day to check how I was doing, and mentioned they'd arrested 2 more people from the fake cop ring. Most of them were in custody now, though he admitted a couple were probably in Mexico or somewhere they couldn't reach. He gave me his card again and said to call if I ever felt unsafe, but nothing weird had happened since the trials ended. 8 months after everything, I met someone at my second job who made me laugh for the first time in forever. He knew my whole story because everyone at work had gossiped about it, but he didn't treat me like I was broken or dangerous. We went for coffee after our shift one night and he listened without judging when I told him the parts the gossip had gotten wrong. He had his own messy divorce story and understood why I flinched when someone came up behind me too fast. We took things slow and he never pushed when I said I needed space to process everything. The girl's mom called me one day to say she'd been promoted to full-time supervisor at the security company with benefits and everything. Her voice sounded stronger than it had in months, and she invited me over to see their apartment now that they'd had time to really settle in. The girl had her own room with Pokemon posters and a desk where she did her homework every night without being asked. She showed me the certificate she'd won for a school writing contest, where she wrote about what real bravery means. The essay was about her mom teaching her to memorize details and stay smart when you're scared, and how sometimes being brave means asking a stranger for help in a mall bathroom. We all had scars that would probably never completely go away, but we were building something new from what was left. Thanks for letting me wonder right alongside you. Definitely been something sharing these moments. Until next time. Like the video, it helps more than you think. At a family dinner, my brother looked at me and asked, "How's the new life in Portland?" I laughed. "What are you talking about?" My best friend Bethany choked on her water. "The $60,000 I sent Bethany for your escape?" I smiled, nervous and confused. "But Bethany told me you refused to help, that you didn't care if I stayed with Dakota." I forced myself to blink back the tears. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. "Didn't care. Emily, I've been sending $2,500 every month since that night you called me crying with a broken jaw." He scrolled frantically. Venmo receipts filled the screen. 24 payments worth $60,000 total. "I moved back with mom and dad," he whispered. "Sold my car. Lauren left me because I chose saving you over our wedding." When I turned to Bethany, my heart stopped. I knew that guilty look in her eyes. "She promised she'd get you out. She sent updates, said you kept backing out." He showed me screenshots of Bethany's texts. "She's not ready yet. Almost got her out today. Keep sending, I'll keep trying." Bethany's wine glass shattered on the floor. "You told me he wouldn't help," I whispered. The silence was deafening. "Emily, you don't understand," Bethany started. "Understand what?" I stood so fast my chair crashed backward. "That you watched him beat me unconscious and then comforted me saying, 'I wish your family cared'?" My hands shook as I pulled down my turtleneck. Purple fingerprints around my throat. This was from the last time I saw him. They still haven't healed. Bethany reached toward me. I don't." I jerked back. "You don't get to comfort me anymore." The words caught in my throat. "I tried to leave," I said, voice cracking. "Remember? You drove me to that apartment viewing. Said it fell through. Then another. Then another." Bethany stumbled backwards, searching for words that wouldn't come. "But you'd just panic. You'd change your mind anyway." "Because I had no money." The scream ripped from my chest. "I maxed 7 credit cards trying to escape." I yanked up my sleeve. Our matching Sisters by Choice tattoo mocked me in faded ink. My brother's voice was deadly quiet. "I created you a GoFundMe. It raised $4,000. And I sent that too." The room spun. "I lost my job because he found out about the remote work. You said no one would hire me anyway." "Your graduation," my brother choked out, angling himself towards my best friend. "You told me she didn't want me there." "I waited for you," I whispered. "Saved you a seat." The math hit me like a train. 2 years, 730 days. "Do you know what happened in those extra 730 days, Bethany?" She didn't answer. "I lost hearing in my left ear. See this?" I turned my head. He ruptured my eardrum because dinner was cold. My brother made a sound like a wounded animal. "I signed over Grandma's house to him, the inheritance, because we needed groceries, while you had $60,000 just sitting there." I was pregnant." The words fell like bombs. 5 months. "Your first niece." I looked at my brother. "I lost her after he threw me down the stairs." "You know what I was thinking about while I bled? How I couldn't afford the hospital." Bethany was crying now. Ugly, selfish tears. "But wait, it gets better." I laughed, high and hysterical. "The damage was too severe. I'm infertile now, forever, because I couldn't afford the follow-up surgery." Bethany took a step back, but I followed. The years of rage were finally breaking free. "You want to know the best part?" I stepped closer. "You were my maid of honor. At the wedding he forced me into. You held my bouquet while I married my monster, knowing you had my escape in your bank account." Bethany screamed. "I deserve to be a mother more than someone who couldn't even leave." I paused, not understanding. "Bethany, where did the money go?" Her face went bright red, like she said something she shouldn't have. "Where's my $60,000, Bethany?" "I used it for IV WTVF, the words burst out. The room went silent. Even the clock stopped ticking. My brother stood slowly. His whole body shook. You stole her chance at children to buy your own? He grabbed my hand, checking my pulse like I might disappear. I used to have nightmares where I was at your funeral, and everyone kept asking why I didn't help. Now it feels like it just came true. Pack your things, he said firmly. Tonight. You didn't just steal money, I said quietly. You stole my family from me. I thought Derek abandoned me. You stole that. Derek was already on another call. I didn't know it at the time, but Derek was about to make my parents pay. Me and Bethany's lives were about to change forever, for better and for worse. Derek walked straight to my bedroom closet and yanked out the duffel bag I'd hidden behind old winter coats, the one I'd packed and unpacked a dozen times over the past year whenever I thought I might actually leave. His phone was already pressed to his ear, and I heard Dad's voice answer on the other end before Derek cut him off with words so cold they made me flinch. You're going to listen for once in your life. He walked into the bathroom and shut the door, but I could still hear his muffled voice getting louder with each word while Bethany sat frozen on my living room floor, mascara running down her face in thick black streaks. My hands shook as I grabbed the plastic grocery bag from under the sink and started throwing in my medications from the bathroom counter. The anxiety pills and painkillers and antibiotics from the last time Dakota hurt me bad enough to need them. The orange bottles clattered against each other as I dropped them twice, trying to get them all in the bag. Then remembered my phone charger and had to crawl under the bed to unplug it from the wall. Derek came back out with his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping, and he picked up my duffel bag with one hand and grabbed the grocery bag from me with the other. We're leaving now. His voice was flat and hard like I'd never heard it before. Mom and Dad will deal with her until the police get here. He nodded toward Bethany, who was still on the floor making these weird gasping sounds like she couldn't catch her breath. I followed Derek out the door without looking back at her, my legs feeling like jelly as we walked down the 3 flights of stairs to his car parked on the street. The second I sat down in the passenger seat, my whole body started shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, even though Derek cranked the heat up all the way and pointed every vent toward me. He drove fast but careful, checking the mirrors every few seconds like he expected Dakota to appear behind us any second. We're going to a motel first, he said after about 20 minutes of driving through back roads I didn't recognize. It's safer than going straight to Mom and Dad's in case he comes looking for you there. The thought of Dakota looking for me made my stomach lurch, and I realized I hadn't even thought about him finding out I was gone until right that second. Derek pulled into a rundown motel with half the neon sign burned out and parked near the office, telling me to stay in the car with the doors locked while he went inside. I watched him through the window as he paid the clerk in cash, not using a credit card that could be traced, and came back with 2 room keys. He drove us around to the back of the building and parked right in front of rooms 23 and 24, grabbing our bags and checking around the parking lot before letting me get out. The rooms were connected by an inner door that he immediately unlocked and propped open, then went through both rooms checking the windows and testing the deadbolts on both outer doors. I'm not leaving you alone tonight, he said, sitting down on the bed across from where I'd collapsed on the other one. That's when everything hit me all at once and I started sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. These huge gasping sobs that felt like they were ripping me apart from the inside. Derek moved over and just held me while I fell completely apart, not saying anything, just letting me cry until I didn't have any tears left and my whole body felt empty and wrung out like a dish rag. I must have fallen asleep at some point because when I woke up it was morning, and Derek was sitting in the chair by the window with his phone in his hand. There's a number here for a domestic violence hotline, he said quietly when he saw I was awake. I think we should call them. My hands were still shaking when I took the phone and dialed the number, listening to it ring 3 times before a woman's voice answered, calm and steady like she'd done this 1,000 times before. My name is Jocelyn Reeves, she said after I stumbled through trying to explain why I was calling. I can meet you at the courthouse today to help you file for an emergency protection order if you're ready. I told her yes, even though I wasn't sure I was ready for anything, and she gave us directions to meet her at the courthouse at 10 o'clock. Derek drove us there in silence, and I saw Jocelyn waiting by the metal detectors, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who took my arm gently and led us to a small office on the 3rd floor. She helped me fill out all the forms while Derek pulled up photos on his phone that he'd screenshot from our video calls over the past 2 years, pictures of my black eyes, and split lips and bruised arms that he'd been keeping as evidence without telling me. The judge was an older woman who looked at everything carefully, studying each photo and reading my statement twice before signing the temporary restraining order against Dakota. This is valid for 2 weeks until your hearing, she explained, but I knew it was just paper, and paper couldn't actually stop him if he really wanted to find me. Derek drove us straight from the courthouse to an urgent care clinic where the doctor, a young woman with gentle hands, took photographs of the purple fingerprints around my throat and documented every cut and bruise on my arms and legs. I wonder what Derek's really saying to their parents behind that bathroom door while Emily's packing. There's something about how cold his voice got that makes me think this family dynamic runs deeper than we're seeing right now. She gave me a referral to see an ENT specialist about my damaged ear, writing notes in my chart about the hearing loss I'd been hiding for months. That evening, Derek called our parents again and put them on speaker, so I could hear Mom crying on the other end. We're getting Bethany out of the apartment, she said between sobs. She admitted everything about the money, all of it. Dad's voice came through next, and he sounded more angry than concerned when he said they'd do whatever it took to help now, like he was mad about having to deal with this mess more than worried about me. Later that night, Jocelyn called to check on me and discuss what would happen next. I think you should stay with family rather than go to a shelter if that's a safe option, she said. We agreed I'd go to my parents' house the next day, but only with new locks on all the doors, and their security system turned on, and nobody allowed to visit without checking who it was first. Derek will stay there too, I told her, and she said that was good, that having someone else there would help. The drive to my parents' house the next morning felt like traveling back in time, passing all the familiar streets and stores from when I was growing up, before Dakota, before everything went wrong. Mom had already changed the locks and gave us new keys, and Dad had activated their security system that they'd never bothered using before. My childhood bedroom looked exactly the same as when I'd left it years ago. The same purple walls and boy band posters and stuffed animals on the shelf like a museum of who I used to be. That first night, I woke up 4 times thinking I heard Dakota in the house, my heart racing and sweat soaking through my shirt, even though Derek had dragged an air mattress into my room and was sleeping right by the door. The familiar wallpaper with its tiny flowers seemed to belong to some other girl's life, someone who hadn't been broken into pieces and put back together wrong. 3 days later, Detective Winnie Guzman knocked on my parents' door at 9 in the morning. She was older than I expected, with gray streaks in her hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. Derek sat next to me on the couch while she pulled out her phone to record everything. She asked me to start from the beginning with Dakota, and I talked for 2 hours straight. My voice cracked when I described the beatings and the lost baby and signing over Grandma's house. She wrote notes while I talked and asked specific questions about dates and hospital visits. Then she wanted to know about Bethany and the money, and Derek pulled up all the screenshots on his phone. He showed her every Venmo payment and every text where Bethany lied about me backing out. The detective scrolled through everything slowly and took pictures of his phone screen with her own phone. She said the DA would review everything for possible fraud charges against Bethany. Before she left, she gave me her card and said to call if I remembered anything else. That afternoon, Jocelyn called and said she found a civil attorney named Alistair Bowen who wanted to meet with us. His office was downtown in a building with marble floors, and I felt out of place in my old sweatshirt. Alistair was younger than I thought lawyers would be, with thick glasses and papers everywhere on his desk. He listened to the whole story without interrupting, then explained we had a strong case for theft and fraud. He said I could sue for the full $60,000 plus extra damages for being trapped longer with Dakota. The legal terms made my head spin, but he broke it down simply. Bethany took money meant for me under false pretenses, which was fraud and conversion. He pulled out a stack of papers for me to sign to officially hire him as my lawyer. His fee would come from whatever we recovered, so I wouldn't owe anything up front. I signed everything with shaking hands while Derek read through each page carefully. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I started going through my old emails on my laptop. Something felt wrong about how I never saw Derek's messages about the GoFundMe he mentioned. I searched for his email address and found dozens of messages in my spam folder somehow. But when I looked closer, I saw someone had created email filters to automatically delete anything from Derek. The filters were dated 2 years ago, right when he started sending money to Bethany. My stomach dropped when I realized Bethany must have gotten into my email account somehow. She knew my passwords because we used to share everything like sisters do. I found the GoFundMe link Derek had sent with pictures of my bruised face and his plea for help. $4,000 from strangers who wanted to help me escape, and I never even knew it existed. The betrayal hit me all over again, and I threw up in the bathroom sink. Derek heard me and came to check, and I showed him what I found on the laptop. His face went white when he saw the email filters, and he started pulling up his own phone. He had saved every text conversation with Bethany for the past 2 years in a folder. He showed me message after message where she controlled his access to me completely. She told him I didn't want him at my graduation because I was too ashamed to see him. She said I refused to come to holidays because I couldn't face the family after marrying Dakota. Every single lie was perfectly crafted to keep us apart while she played the supportive best friend. She even sent him fake updates about trying to get me out with specific details about apartment viewings. Meanwhile, she was telling me Derek abandoned me and didn't care if I lived or died. The manipulation was so calculated it made me physically sick to read through everything. 2 days later, Alistair called to say he was sending official legal letters to preserve evidence. He sent one to Venmo requiring them to keep all records of Derek's payments to Bethany. He sent another to GoFundMe to preserve the fundraiser Derek created and all donation records. Then he sent a demand letter directly to Bethany requiring her to maintain all bank records about the money. She had 30 days to respond, or we would file the lawsuit and make everything public. My parents called that night asking for a family meeting, and we drove over the next morning. Mom had been crying and her eyes were red and puffy when she opened the door. She sat us down in the living room and admitted she suspected something was wrong with Dakota. She said she saw the bruises at Thanksgiving but didn't want to interfere in my marriage. Dad got defensive immediately and started complaining about the legal mess we were creating with Bethany. He said lawsuits would just drag everything out and make our family look bad in town. But he agreed to support me even though his voice sounded more annoyed than caring. The conversation went in circles with Mom crying and Dad getting frustrated about money and reputation. I left feeling more alone than before, even though they said they wanted to help. The next week, I finally saw the ENT specialist about my ear, and she did a bunch of tests. She confirmed what I already knew about permanent hearing loss from the ruptured eardrum. She said the damage was too old to repair surgically, and scheduled me for a hearing aid fitting. I would need to wear one for the rest of my life and replace it every few years. Another thing Dakota stole from me that I could never get back no matter what happened legally. Jocelyn called that afternoon and asked if I wanted to attend a support group for abuse survivors. I didn't want to go, but Derek said it might help, so I agreed to try once. The meeting was in a church basement with folding chairs in a circle and terrible coffee. There were 8 other women there, and they all had different stories but the same broken look. One woman's sister stole her inheritance while she was in the hospital after her husband's attack. Another woman's best friend sabotaged all her job applications to keep her dependent and trapped. Hearing their stories made me realize betrayal comes in so many forms, but the pain feels the same. I didn't talk that first meeting, but I listened to everything and cried quietly in my chair. 2 weeks after the restraining order, Dakota started calling from different numbers, leaving voicemails. He would cry and apologize, then get angry and threaten to find me wherever I was hiding. Derek helped me document every call, and we went to the police station to file a report. The officer said they would arrest Dakota if he kept violating the order, but I knew that wouldn't stop him. We changed my phone number that day and only gave it to necessary people like lawyers. 3 weeks after sending the demand letter, Alistair got a response from Bethany's lawyer. The letter said she couldn't pay back the money because she was $80,000 in debt from failed IVF cycles. They claimed the money was a gift from Derek to help her have a baby, not theft. Reading that made me so angry I actually threw my phone across the room and cracked the screen. The audacity of claiming my escape money was a gift made me physically sick with rage. Alistair called the next morning and asked me to come to his office to review our strategy. Derek drove me there and we sat in the conference room while Alistair spread out printed screenshots of all Bethany's texts to Derek. He pointed to specific messages where she told Derek I was backing out, that I wasn't ready, that I kept changing my mind. Then he showed bank records proving she deposited Derek's money the same days she sent those lies. He explained that this pattern showed clear intent to deceive, and that we could prove she knew exactly what she was doing when she took the money. The legal terms made my head spin, but the basic idea was simple enough. Bethany lied to get money that wasn't hers, and we had proof. Alistair said judges hate this kind of betrayal, and we had a strong case for getting every penny back plus damages. Bethany's lawyer claiming those payments were gifts for IVF makes me wonder how long she's been planning this defense. The timing of those email filters 2 years ago, right when Derek started sending money, seems way too convenient to be coincidence. While he talked, I kept seeing flashes of my wedding day 2 years ago. Bethany had been there at 6 in the morning to help me get ready. She curled my hair and fixed my veil when my hands shook too much to pin it right. She held my bouquet at the altar while I said vows to Dakota that made me want to throw up. She gave a maid of honor speech about true love and finding your person, all while $60,000 sat in her bank account. The memory made me so angry I had to excuse myself to the bathroom where I dry heaved over the toilet. When I came back, Derek was on the phone with our parents asking about help with an apartment. I heard Dad's voice through the speaker complaining about how much everything costs. Mom took the phone and said they would help, but I had to promise to get therapy and get my life together. They wanted receipts for everything and weekly check-ins about my progress. Derek's jaw tightened, but he agreed to their terms because we both knew I had no other options. That afternoon, Jocelyn called about a data entry job one of her contacts needed filled. It was boring work typing numbers into spreadsheets, but I could do it from anywhere with internet. The pay was barely enough for food and basic bills, but having any income felt huge. I filled out the application that night and got approved 2 days later. My first week I made $300, and when the deposit hit my account, I sat on Derek's couch crying with relief. Detective Guzman called while I was working on spreadsheets the next week. She said the district attorney reviewed my case and decided to file assault charges against Dakota. There would be a preliminary hearing in 3 weeks where I'd have to testify about the abuse. My whole body went cold at the thought of seeing him again. She said I could request screens so I wouldn't have to look at him directly, but I'd still be in the same room. I agreed to testify even though the idea made me want to run away and never come back. Meanwhile, Bethany started posting weird stuff on social media about being betrayed and how only real friends understand fertility struggles. Our mutual friends started texting me asking what happened between us. I kept my answers short, just saying we had a falling out and leaving it at that. Derek wanted me to post the truth about what she did, but I was too tired to deal with the drama. I had my first appointment with Catherine Walsh 3 days before the criminal hearing. She specialized in trauma and didn't push me to forgive anyone or move on like other therapists I'd tried. Instead, she helped me make a safety plan for the hearing and taught me breathing exercises for when I felt panic rising. We talked about small goals like eating 3 meals a day and taking showers regularly. She said healing wasn't linear and some days would be harder than others. Insurance covered part of the sessions, but I still had to pay $40 each time, which ate into my food budget. A week later, Alistair called with news that made me see red all over again. Through discovery, he got Bethany's full bank records showing where the money went. Yes, she spent thousands on IVF treatments, but she also bought plane tickets to Hawaii, put $8,000 down on a new car, and had charges at expensive stores almost every week. While I was getting my eardrum ruptured and losing my baby, she was shopping at Nordstrom with my escape money. Alistair said this would help our case because it showed she didn't even use all the money for fertility treatments like she claimed. We officially filed the lawsuit the next Monday. Alistair warned me that court records are public and people might find out about everything that happened. I thought about all the shame and secrets I'd been carrying and decided I didn't care anymore. Let people know what Bethany did and what I survived. At least the truth would be out there instead of her lies. That same night, Derek showed me his phone where he'd texted his ex Lauren to apologize for choosing to help me over their wedding. Her response was kind, but clear that they were done forever. She said some choices change everything and can't be undone no matter how sorry you are. Derek's eyes were red when he showed me, and we both sat there crying about everything he lost, trying to save me, while Bethany stole that chance away. 3 days later, Mom called another family meeting, and I could tell from her voice something was wrong. Dad sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded while Mom paced back and forth near the window. Derek arrived late and took the seat next to me without saying anything. Mom finally stopped pacing and looked right at me. "We need to tell you something about Bethany." My stomach dropped because I knew this wasn't going to be good. Dad cleared his throat and started talking about how Bethany had called them 2 years ago, worried about me. She'd told them about the bruises and asked what she should do. Mom's voice cracked when she admitted they told Bethany to handle it herself because they didn't want to get involved in my personal business. They gave her permission to manage the whole situation instead of stepping in themselves. The room went cold and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Derek slammed his fist on the table so hard the salt shaker fell over. "You told her to handle it?" His voice was deadly quiet. Dad tried to explain they thought it would be better coming from a friend, but Derek wasn't having it. I stood up and walked out without saying anything because if I opened my mouth, I'd scream. The restraining order hearing happened 2 weeks later at the courthouse downtown. I wore my only nice outfit and sat behind the prosecutor while Dakota sat on the other side with his lawyer. The judge reviewed all the violations we'd documented, including the phone calls and texts, despite the temporary order. Dakota's lawyer tried to argue they were just attempts to reconcile, but the judge wasn't buying it. She looked through the evidence folder with all the photos of my injuries and the police reports. After 20 minutes, she granted a 2-year protection order requiring Dakota to stay 500 feet away from me at all times. He had to surrender his guns to the sheriff within 48 hours. The judge warned him that any violation would result in immediate arrest. It was just a piece of paper, but at least now it had real consequences attached. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a tiny bit safer, even though I knew paper couldn't really stop him if he wanted to hurt me again. Alistair called the next morning saying Bethany's lawyer wanted to meet about a settlement. We met at his office that afternoon where her lawyer laid out the offer on official letterhead. She would pay back $30,000 over 10 years if I signed an NDA agreeing never to discuss what happened publicly. The lawyer said this was generous considering Bethany's financial situation. Alistair leaned back in his chair and told them it was insulting to offer half the stolen amount, plus demand silence about it. I looked at the paper with all its legal language and pushed it back across the table. No deal. The lawyer seemed surprised and started explaining how I'd get nothing if we went to trial, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let Bethany buy my silence for half of what she stole. At support group that week, the room split down the middle about my decision. Some women thought I was being stupid, turning down guaranteed money when I desperately needed it. Others said standing my ground was the right thing, even if it meant getting nothing in the end. One woman who'd been coming for 3 years said her sister stole her inheritance and she took a settlement with an NDA, but regretted it every day because she couldn't warn other people. The facilitator reminded us there's no right way to seek justice and everyone has to make their own choice. I sat there listening to everyone's opinions and realized how much Bethany's betrayal had messed up my ability to trust anyone's motives anymore. Even these women trying to help made me wonder what they really wanted from me. The fertility specialist appointment came 2 weeks later at the women's clinic across town. She reviewed all my medical records from the miscarriage and did an exam that hurt more than I expected. After running some tests, she sat down and confirmed what the hospital had already told me. The damage from the untreated miscarriage was too severe, and I'd never be able to carry a pregnancy. She talked about other options like adoption or using a surrogate, but I couldn't even process that information. Walking out to my car, I felt hollow, but also weirdly relieved to know for certain instead of wondering. There was no maybe anymore, just a definite never. I sat in the parking lot for an hour before I could drive home. My parents finally agreed to help with an apartment deposit after I showed them 3 rejection letters from cheaper places that turned me down for bad credit. Mom wrote the check while making comments about being more responsible with money in the future. The landlord at the 4th place almost rejected me too when he ran my credit, but Derek offered to co-sign the lease. After 2 hours of paperwork and background checks, I got the keys to a tiny studio apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. It was 300 square feet with a kitchenette and a bathroom so small you could touch both walls at once, but it was mine. Moving day came a week later, and everything I owned fit in Derek's car with room to spare. He helped me carry up 2 boxes of clothes and a bag of kitchen stuff Mom had given me. Derek installed new deadbolts on the door and set up a doorbell camera that sent alerts to my phone. Mom showed up with grocery bags and some old sheets from their linen closet. That first night alone, I checked the lock 6 times and jumped at every noise in the hallway. But I also slept better than I had in months, knowing Dakota didn't have a key to this door. Derek's ex Lauren saying some choices can't be undone makes me curious about what she's really feeling beneath that polite response. There's something deeper in how she phrased that. 2 weeks into living alone, I got a call from Detective Guzman saying Dakota had been caught on my parents' security camera driving by their house 3 times in one night. We filed another violation report and had to go back to court where the judge was clearly angry. She told Dakota's lawyer that his client was testing her patience and next time would mean jail time, not just warnings. I bought more locks for my windows and started varying my route to work, but refused to live, scared all the time. Good news finally came when Alistair called saying the court had frozen $15,000 of Bethany's assets while our lawsuit was pending. Her lawyer filed an emergency motion claiming this created severe financial hardship for his client. The judge reviewed the motion and noted that Bethany hadn't worried about hardship when she was spending stolen money meant for domestic violence escape. The freeze would stay in place until the case was resolved. It was a small victory, but the first real consequence Bethany had faced for what she did. A week later, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox with Bethany's handwriting on it. Inside was a 3-page letter where she tried to explain herself without really apologizing. She wrote about being jealous of my relationship with Derek since we were kids and how desperate she was to have a baby. She said the debt from failed IVF treatments made her convince herself she deserved the money more than someone who kept choosing to stay with their abuser. There was no real sorry anywhere in the letter, just explanations and excuses that changed nothing about what she'd done. 3 weeks later, Catherine handed me a yellow legal pad in her office and told me to write everything I needed from my parents. My hand shook as I wrote that they had to admit they failed to protect me and stop acting like what happened wasn't that bad. I wrote that they couldn't blame me for the legal stuff with Bethany or make me feel guilty about needing their help. Catherine read it over and helped me make it clearer without softening the message. I folded the letter into an envelope and dropped it in the mailbox outside her building, even though I knew they might never talk to me again. 2 days later, Mom called saying they'd do family therapy if that's what it took to fix things. Our first session was awkward with all 4 of us crammed into the therapist's small office. Mom kept wiping her eyes and saying she was sorry without making excuses about not knowing how bad things were. Dad sat with his arms crossed and kept checking his watch, but at least he showed up. The therapist said healing would take time and there was potential if everyone stayed committed. I nodded, but didn't really believe things would get better between us. That weekend, I spread all the hospital papers from my miscarriage across Derek's kitchen table. Each receipt and discharge form and test result made my chest tight, but I sorted them into neat piles by date. Derek helped me scan everything into his computer and make backup copies on a flash drive. Alistair said having everything organized would help our case against Bethany. The mediation happened in a conference room downtown with lawyers on both sides of a long table. Bethany wouldn't look at me while her lawyer argued she couldn't pay back the full amount. After 4 hours of back and forth, she agreed to pay $60,000 over 15 years with no NDA so I could talk about what she did. She also had to do 200 hours at a domestic violence shelter and keep paying no matter what happened with her finances. It wasn't perfect, but seeing her sign those papers admitting she stole from me felt like something. A week later, Detective Guzman called about Dakota's case moving forward. The DA offered him 3 years probation with a batterer program and permanent restraining order instead of trial. If he messed up during probation, he'd serve 2 years in prison. I thought about it for 3 days before agreeing, because I couldn't handle telling everything again in a public trial. At the plea hearing, I stood at the podium reading my victim impact statement about the permanent hearing loss and infertility. Dakota stared at the table the whole time, never looking up once. The judge accepted the plea and gave him the sentence while I gripped Derek's hand so hard my knuckles went white. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt empty, but also like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. The next morning, I got a call from a company about the customer service application I'd sent weeks ago. The hiring manager asked about the gap in my work history, and I told her the truth about leaving an abusive situation. She said she was a survivor too and believed in second chances. They offered me full-time remote work with health insurance starting next month. I cried after hanging up because it was the first good news in so long. At our next family therapy session, Dad finally looked at me instead of the wall. He said he was scared of confrontation and chose to ignore what was happening instead of protecting me. My parents agreed to pay for my therapy and medical bills from my injuries. The therapist said it was progress, even if our relationship would never be the same as before. With insurance starting soon, I made appointments to see about surgery for the internal scarring from the miscarriage. The doctor examined me and said surgery wouldn't fix the fertility damage but might help with the constant pain I'd been having. I scheduled it for next month and tried not to think about how much recovery would cost. The surgery took longer than expected, but the doctor said it went well. I woke up feeling like my insides were on fire, and the pain meds made me throw up. 3 days later, my temperature spiked and the incision started leaking yellow fluid. The emergency room doctor said I had an infection and needed IV antibiotics for a week. I had to call my new job and explain why I'd missed training. The manager was understanding, but I could tell I'd already used up her patience before even starting properly. The antibiotics made me so tired I could barely stay awake for the online training modules. Derek had to loan me $800 for the hospital bills that insurance didn't cover. Mom said they couldn't afford both my therapy and these surprise medical costs, so I'd have to figure something out. I stared at the pile of bills on my kitchen counter, wondering if I'd ever stop drowning in debt from what Dakota and Bethany did to me. 2 weeks later, Alistair called while I was sorting through medical bills at my kitchen table. He said Bethany's first payment bounced and her lawyer just sent notice she was filing for bankruptcy. My hands went numb holding the phone as he explained bankruptcy could wipe out the whole debt if the court allowed it. He filed an emergency motion right away arguing fraud debts can't be discharged, but warned me the legal fight could take years. The retainer alone would cost another $5,000 I didn't have. I stared at the $60,000 settlement papers that might become worthless and had to decide if I should keep fighting or just accept I'd never see the money. 3 days later, Detective Guzman called about Dakota getting arrested for drunk driving with a blood alcohol 3 times the legal limit. Since it happened during his probation, the prison sentence kicked in automatically, and he'd served 2 years starting immediately. Part of me felt safer knowing he was locked up, but that same afternoon his mom started leaving voicemails calling me a vindictive bitch. His brother sent Facebook messages saying I ruined Dakota's life and deserved everything that happened to me. The police said the threats weren't specific enough to do anything about, so I spent money I didn't have on more security cameras for my apartment door. My hearing aid finally arrived, but insurance only covered the cheapest model that whistled with feedback every time I turned my head. The audiologist adjusted it 3 times, but said the basic model just did that sometimes. During work calls, the feedback got so bad, I'd have to mute myself and pretend my internet was cutting out. She told me I'd need to replace it every few years at $3,000 each time, which made my stomach drop. Derek started bringing his new girlfriend Amy to family dinners, and she kept asking why he was so involved in helping his adult sister. He missed our next 2 therapy sessions, and when I confronted him, he finally admitted he resented losing Lauren and his savings because of me. We screamed at each other in Mom's driveway until we both cried and hugged, but something felt broken between us after that. 6 months into the payment plan, Bethany had only made 2 payments before claiming hardship from new IVF treatments costing $15,000. The court modified her payment schedule, stretching it to 20 years, which meant I'd be 53 when it finished if she even kept paying. Alistair said I should mentally write off the money to move forward, but the injustice burned in my chest every night. My apartment building sold to a developer who sent notices raising rent 40%, which was legal with 60 days notice in our state. Even with my full-time job, I couldn't afford the new rate, and my credit was too damaged from medical debt to qualify anywhere decent. Mom offered to let me move back home, but with rules about being home by 10 and getting my life together, that made me feel like a teenager. At what became my last support group meeting, I looked around and recognized the same faces from a year ago, still telling the same stories. Some women had moved on with their lives, while others like me seemed stuck between who we were and who we wanted to be. The facilitator asked if I wanted to share, but I just shook my head and never went back. A year after leaving Dakota, I sat at my kitchen table with bankruptcy papers spread out next to past due medical bills totaling $48,000. The lawyer explained I could keep my car and basic stuff, but any money from Bethany's lawsuit would go to creditors first anyway. I signed my name on each form, knowing it meant 7 more years of ruined credit on top of everything else. At least this time it was my choice, even though I wondered if there was really any difference between Dakota's cage and this new one made of poverty and damaged credit. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this today. It's definitely been quite a journey to share together. Catch you next time, and hey, subscribe for more content like this. My mom sold me for $50, so I sent her to jail. Years later, she's back, claiming I owe her another chance. I was 9 years old when I gave my mom her first piggyback ride because she was passed out on the sidewalk near our home, drunk out of her mind. "Is mommy dead?" was the first thing my younger brother asked when we walked in the door. I told him no, and that she was just resting after getting too much fresh air. He was only 5 years younger than me, but it felt like 10, because I was the one who taught him how to read, how to trace letters, how to roll his R's, and whenever our mom wasn't around, which was 95% of the time, I distracted him with cartoons and making shapes with shadows against the wall. I was 12 when I got my first babysitting job and was making even more money than my mom because her earnings were government support and food stamps, and when I came home with a new white t-shirt that I had bought from Goodwill, she slapped the smile straight off my face, over and over again, until I fell to the floor. "I can barely afford to buy my beer, and you think you can come strolling in looking all fancy." I stared at her blankly. This was the first store-bought thing I had owned in years, because the rest of my wardrobe came from the lost and found boxes from nearby homeless shelters. And just when I stood up and got my bearings, she continued, "Get the F out of my home. No son of mine will be a show-off." My mind instantly went to my brother, and when I realized he was still at school, I let out a sigh of relief. And the last thing I wanted was to have my mom still be angry when he came home. So I decided to follow her rules and walked upstairs to pack my belongings. Everything fit into one backpack. As I left, I turned around to see if my mom would change her mind. Spoiler alert, she did not. I didn't even know where to go. I didn't know who my dad was, and I already knew from my mom's friends that all the local homeless shelters were full. I sort of just walked around for a while and let my feet do the navigating. And when the sky turned dark, I took refuge in my favorite playground, the one I always used to go to with Louis. So there I was, 12 years old, sitting on the swings at 11 p.m. when an adult came up to me. It was a woman with a soft voice. Her face was wrinkly like she had smiled a lot in her life. "Why don't you go home?" she asked kindly. I looked her right in the eyes and smiled back without saying a word, as if I ever had one. We ended up talking for a while, and I gave her my address. She took my hand and brought me to her car. Turns out she was a social worker. I thought she would drive me somewhere safe, but instead she drove me back home. When she knocked on the door, Louis answered, and he smiled so brightly it could have lit up the entire street. "Is this your brother?" she asked, her voice completely neutral. neutral, but there was a glimmer in her eyes that told me she was paying more attention than she was letting on. That night, I slept hidden under Lewis's bed, and when I woke up in the middle of the night, his head was lying on my chest with his tiny arms wrapped around my neck. I stared at his soft face in a deep sleep, the way his lips curled upwards like he was having a good dream. That's when I knew he had to be protected. And I knew how our mom treated us wasn't okay, but I wanted the problem to go away by itself, and one day it did. Or more specifically, the next morning. Because that's when I heard someone banging on the door. My mom opened it and I instantly recognized the voice. It was the same woman from the park. I crept down the stairs and saw a police officer standing beside her. He had one of those faces that seemed friendly, but looked like it could turn at any second. Luckily, my mom spotted me instantly and dragged me down the stairs at full force, because that was more than enough evidence for the officer to hold her down, while the social worker brought me and my brother into an emergency foster home. The parents basically treated me as a work slave, but it felt like nirvana, because they were treating Louis like he was one of their own, and that's all I wanted for him. In fact, they loved him so much that they wanted to adopt him, and since Louis told them that being housed with me was a non-negotiable, they took me in too. The process was actually extremely easy. Our mom didn't even fight for us because the foster family paid her $50 to terminate her parenting rights to us, and she agreed without hesitation. Update: I'm now 17 and have spent my entire life working and studying. I have around $2,000 in my bank account. The family never really warmed up to me, but luckily Louis got the childhood I never had. Everything was going well until 6 months ago. My mom managed to track down what school I was attending, and I saw her waiting outside when school ended. I always figured she'd make her come back in one way or another, so I just asked her what she wanted. "You owe me," she said with a straight face. But I wasn't the same kid she dragged down the stairs anymore. I was almost an adult, so I told her to F off and just walked home. But that evening when Louis came home from soccer practice, he brought a guest. It was our mother. He told me I owed it to her to give her another chance. I stared at Louis, my heart sinking into my stomach, the way he looked at me with those hopeful eyes, the same ones that used to light up when I'd make shadow puppets on the wall. He genuinely believed we should give her a chance. Our mother stood behind him, and I could see the satisfaction creeping across her face. She'd gotten to him. Somehow, she'd wormed her way into his head and convinced him that she deserved another shot at being our mother. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I told Louis we needed to talk privately, but our mother interrupted, saying anything I had to say could be said in front of her. She was already trying to control the situation. Louis defended her, saying she'd been sober for 3 months and was working on getting her life together. The way he spoke, I could tell he'd been talking to her for a while. This wasn't their first meeting. My foster parents weren't home yet, which meant I had to handle this carefully. I couldn't just kick her out without causing a scene that would upset Louis, so I did what I'd always done. I put Louis first. I agreed to let her stay for dinner, hoping that would be enough to satisfy Louis and get her to leave. But as soon as I said yes, she made herself comfortable on the couch like she belonged there. While I cooked, I watched them interact. Louis showed her his soccer trophies, his report cards, all the things I'd helped him achieve. She nodded and smiled, playing the proud mother role perfectly. It made me sick. During dinner, she started asking questions about our foster family's finances. How big was the house? Did they both work? What kind of cars did they drive? Louis answered innocently, not realizing she was fishing for information. When our foster parents came home, they were shocked to see her there. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Our foster mom's face went pale, and our foster dad's jaw clenched tight. They asked to speak with me privately in the kitchen. They wanted to know why I'd let her in, how she'd found us. I explained about Louis bringing her home, and they exchanged worried looks. They told me she wasn't welcome in their home, that they'd paid for her to stay away. But when we went back to the living room, Louis was showing her his bedroom, completely oblivious to the situation. That night, after she finally left with promises to Louis that she'd see him again soon, I tried to talk to him. I reminded him of all the times she'd hurt us, all the nights we'd gone hungry while she drank, but he just shook his head. He told me I was being unfair, that people could change. He said she'd explained everything, that she'd been sick back then, that she hadn't known how to be a good mother. She'd fed him every excuse in the book, and he'd swallowed them all. Over the next few weeks, she kept showing up, sometimes at his soccer practice, sometimes waiting outside his school. Louis would text her constantly, and I'd catch him sneaking phone calls late at night. Our foster parents tried to intervene, but Louis threatened to run away if they tried to keep him from seeing her. They were stuck. They loved him too much to risk losing him, but they knew how dangerous she was. I started noticing things going missing around the house. Small things at first. A phone charger here, some loose change there, then bigger items. Our foster mom's earrings, our foster dad's watch. One morning, our foster mom confronted me about it. She'd found her missing earrings in my backpack. I was stunned. I had no idea how they'd gotten there, but the look on her face told me she didn't believe me. More items turned up in my room over the following days. Each time I denied taking them, but I could see the trust eroding in their eyes. They'd never fully warmed up to me, and now they had a reason to justify their coldness. Louis started acting different around me too. When I tried to talk to him about our mother, he'd get defensive. He'd accuse me of being jealous that she wanted a relationship with him. He said I was trying to sabotage their reunion because I was bitter. I knew our mother was behind the thefts, but I had no proof. She was too smart to leave fingerprints, too careful to get caught in the act. She was systematically destroying my credibility, and it was working. One evening, I overheard her on the phone in our backyard. She'd been drinking. I could hear it in her voice. She was bragging to someone about how easy it was to manipulate Louis, how the foster family had money, how she was going to get a nice payday out of this. I quickly grabbed my phone and started recording. This was the evidence I needed. She went on about her plan, how she was framing me for the thefts, how once I was out of the the picture, she'd have full access to Louis and could work on getting money from the foster family. But just as I was about to stop recording, she spotted me through the window, her face twisted with rage, and she stormed inside. Before I could react, she'd grabbed my phone and smashed it against the wall. She leaned in close, her breath reeking of alcohol, and whispered that if I tried anything like that again, she'd tell everyone I'd been stealing from the family and had attacked her when she confronted me about it. She had scratches on her arms, self-inflicted, I realized. To back up her story, I was trapped. Our foster parents already suspected me of theft, and now my only evidence was destroyed. Louis barely spoke to me anymore, convinced I was the villain in this story. The situation escalated when our foster parents installed a lock on their bedroom door. They didn't say it was because of me, but I knew. The message was clear. I wasn't trusted in their home anymore. Our mother's visits became more frequent. She'd show up for dinner, always when our foster parents were working late. She'd fill Louis's head with stories about how we could be a real family again, how she had a place lined up for us to live together. I tried one last time to reach Louis. I showed him our old apartment building, reminded him of the nights we'd gone without food, the times I'd had to carry her home, but he just accused me of living in the past, of not believing people could change. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Louis had a big soccer match, the championship game for his league. Our foster parents were both there, along with dozens of other families. Our mother showed up too, already stumbling slightly. She'd been drinking more than usual, probably nervous about being around so many people. She tried to play it off, but I could see the signs, the way she swayed slightly, the too loud laugh, the glassy eyes. During halftime, she approached me near the concession stand. She started her usual routine, telling me I was ruining everything, that I needed to stop poisoning Louis against her. But this time, I didn't back down. I told her loudly that I knew what she was doing, that I knew about the stealing, the manipulation, the lies. People started to stare, but I didn't care. I was done being silent. She tried to quiet me down, but I kept going. I told her she'd never change, that she was the same selfish hammered who'd chosen beer over her own children. That's when she snapped. She lunged at me, screaming obscenities. Her fist connected with my jaw before several parents pulled her off. She was wild, thrashing and yelling about how I'd ruined her life, how I owed her for all the years she'd wasted raising me. Louis saw the whole thing. The look on his face as he watched our mother being restrained by strangers, mascara running down her face as she screamed threats at me. It was like watching him wake up from a dream. When she saw Louis staring at her, she tried to compose herself. She reached for him, telling him we needed to leave, that these people didn't understand their love. She actually tried to grab his arm and pull him away from the field, but Louis stepped back. For the first time in months, he stepped away from her instead of toward her. She grabbed for him again, more desperately this time, and that's when one of the other parents intervened. The woman who stepped in happened to be a family counselor who worked with troubled youth. She'd been watching our family dynamics for weeks at the games, she later told us. She positioned herself between Louis and our mother, speaking calmly but firmly. Our mother completely lost it. She shoved the counselor and made another grab for Louis, screaming that he was her son and she had rights. Someone called the police while other parents formed a protective circle around Louis. When the officers arrived, our mother was still ranting. She told them I'd assaulted her, that I was a thief and a liar. But dozens of witnesses had seen her attack me, had heard her threats, had watched her try to forcibly take Louis. The counselor pulled our foster parents aside while the police dealt with our mother. She explained what she'd observed, how she'd seen the signs of manipulation and parental alienation. She offered to provide a statement and help our family access resources. Our foster parents looked stunned. They turned to me with expressions I'd never seen before, genuine remorse mixed with understanding. Our foster mom actually had tears in her eyes as she apologized for doubting me. The police arrested our mother for assault and attempted kidnapping. As they led her away in handcuffs, she was still screaming about how we owed her, how she'd make us pay, but her words had lost their power. Louis broke down crying. He kept apologizing, saying he should have listened to me, should have remembered what she was really like. I held him the same way I had when he was 5, telling him it wasn't his fault. That night, our foster family had the first real conversation we'd ever had. They admitted they'd been unfair to me, that they'd let their initial impressions cloud their judgment. They'd seen me as a burden that came with the child they really wanted, and they were ashamed of that. Our foster dad actually cried when he apologized. He said watching me stand up to our mother, seeing how I'd protected Louis even when everyone was against me, it had shown him who I really was. He called me a hero, said he was proud to have me as a son. The counselor from the soccer game connected us with a family therapist who specialized in cases like ours. Through those sessions, Louis finally understood the full extent of what our mother had done, not just recently, but throughout our entire childhood. He learned about parentification, about how I'd been forced to become his parent when I was just a child myself. He cried when he realized how much I'd sacrificed for him, how I'd given up my childhood so he could have one. Our mother was sentenced to 6 months in jail and a restraining order that prevented her from contacting us. We heard she'd tried to convince her lawyer that we'd stolen her parental rights, that the $50 wasn't enough. The judge wasn't sympathetic. Our foster family changed after that. They included me in everything, treated me like an actual son instead of an obligation. They even started a college fund for me, saying it was the least they could do after everything I'd been through. Louis and I grew closer than ever. He started introducing me as his hero instead of just his brother. He'd tell anyone who'd listen about how I'd raised him, protected him, saved him. It was embarrassing, but also healing. On my 18th birthday, our foster parents surprised me with adoption papers. They said they knew I was technically an adult, but they wanted to make it official. I was their son, and they were proud of me. I cried harder than I had in years. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real family. Not just Louis, who I'd always protect, but parents who saw me, valued me, and loved me for who I was. Our mother got out of jail eventually, but she never contacted us again. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to another state. right, probably running the same cons on other people, but she couldn't hurt us anymore. Looking back, I realized that her return was actually a gift. It forced our family to confront the dynamics we'd been living with, to address the walls we'd built. It showed Louis the truth he needed to see, and it showed our foster parents the son they'd been overlooking. I still have the $2,000 I'd saved up, plus more now from my part-time job, but I don't need it for escape anymore. Now I'm saving for college, for a future I can actually envision. Louis plays soccer in high school now, and I never miss a game. Our parents, our real parents, the ones who chose us and fought for us, are always there too. We cheer together, a real family united by choice rather than blood. Sometimes I think about that 9-year-old boy carrying his hammered mother home, trying to protect his baby brother from the truth. I wish I could tell him that it would all be worth it, that every sacrifice would lead to something beautiful, but I think somehow he already knew. That's why he kept going, kept fighting, kept protecting. Because real love isn't about what you're owed, it's about what you're willing to give. And in the end, that love came back to me tenfold. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. Louis sat across from me at the kitchen table, his eyes still red from crying. Our foster parents had gone to bed, emotionally drained from the evening's confrontation. I could tell Louis wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I made us both hot chocolate, the way I used to when we were kids. He wrapped his hands around the mug and finally spoke. He told me she'd first approached him 3 months ago at soccer practice. She'd been watching from a distance for weeks before working up the courage to talk to him. She'd told him stories about how she'd been in therapy, how she'd gotten a job at a diner, how she thought about us every day. She showed him pictures she'd kept of us as babies, told him about the songs she used to sing to him, all the memories I'd tried so hard to help him forget. The manipulation had been gradual. First, she just wanted to watch his practices. Then she started bringing him snacks, remembering his favorite foods. She'd cry about how much she missed us, how the foster family had stolen us from her. She painted herself as the victim and me as the one keeping them apart. Louis admitted he'd given her his phone number after the second meeting. She'd text him constantly, sending him old photos, telling him how proud she was. She knew exactly which buttons to push. Every text ended with how much she loved him, how she'd changed, how we could be a family again. I asked him why he hadn't told me. He looked down at his mug and said she'd convinced him I'd try to stop them from reconnecting. She'd told him I was bitter about my childhood, that I couldn't forgive her the way he could. She'd made him believe keeping secrets from me was protecting our relationship. The next morning, our foster parents sat us down for a family meeting. They'd been up most of the night discussing what to do. They wanted to file a restraining order immediately, but they needed both of us on board. Louis hesitated, still caught between the mother he wanted and the mother she actually was. Our foster mom, Patricia, reached across the table and took Louis's hand. She told him about patterns of manipulation, how abusers often target the most vulnerable family members. She wasn't trying to turn him against our mother, she said, but to help him recognize unhealthy patterns. Our foster dad, Robert, shared his own story. His father had been an alcoholic who disappeared when he was 10, only to return years later with promises of change. The cycle of hope and disappointment had nearly destroyed his family. He understood the pull of wanting to believe a parent could change. Louis agreed to the restraining order, but I could see it was culling him. Part of him still hoped she'd prove us all wrong. That weekend, while our foster parents met with their lawyer, Louis barely left his room. I'd hear him crying at night, mourning the mother he'd built up in his mind. Monday came with new challenges. When I got to school, I found my locker had been vandalized. Someone had written "thief" across it in permanent marker. I knew immediately our mother was behind it, but I couldn't prove it. The janitor helped me clean it off, but the damage was done. Word spread quickly. By lunch, I was getting strange looks from classmates. Someone had started a rumor that I'd been stealing from my foster family, that they were planning to kick me out. A few people asked me directly if it was true. I denied it, but rumors have a way of taking on a life of their own. Louis texted me during his lunch period. Kids at his school were saying similar things. Someone had seen our mother talking to students outside the building, spreading her poison. Even with a restraining order pending, she was finding ways to hurt us. That afternoon, I stayed late at school to work on a project. When I finally headed home, I noticed a car following me. It wasn't our mother's hit-up sedan, but something felt wrong. I took a detour through the park, and the car continued to follow. My heart raced as I picked up my pace. The car pulled up beside me and the window rolled down. It was a man I didn't recognize, rough-looking with bloodshot eyes. He called out my name and said my mother wanted to talk to me, said she had something important to tell me about Louis. I ran. I cut through backyards and over fences until I was sure I'd lost him. When I got home, I was shaking. Our foster parents called the police immediately, but without a license plate or clear description, there wasn't much they could do. That night, Patricia installed new locks on all the doors and windows. Robert set up a security camera system he'd been meaning to install for months. They tried to make it seem like normal home improvements, but we all knew why they were really doing it. The restraining order was approved 2 days later. Our mother was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from us, our home, and our schools. The judge also prohibited her from contacting us through third parties. It should have made us feel safer, but it only seemed to make her more desperate. The stolen items that had been planted in my room became a bigger issue when our foster parents' insurance company got involved. They needed a police report for the claim, which meant officially documenting the thefts. Even though our foster parents now believed I wasn't responsible, having my name associated with the report was humiliating. Louis started seeing a therapist to process everything. Dr. Martinez specialized in family trauma and manipulation. Louis would come home from sessions emotionally drained, but slowly starting to understand how our mother had groomed him, how she'd used his natural desire for maternal love against him. One session, Dr. Martinez invited me to join. Louis needed to hear directly from me about our childhood, to fill in the gaps our mother had painted over with her lies. I told him about the nights I'd stayed awake making sure she hadn't left cigarettes burning, about about the times I'd hidden money so we could eat when she spent everything on alcohol. Louis broke down when I told him about the time she'd locked me outside in the winter because I'd asked her to buy him medicine for his fever. I'd spent the night in the garage, sneaking back in through a window when I heard him crying. He'd been too young to remember, but I'd never forgotten. The harassment continued in subtler ways. Our foster parents started getting calls from collection agencies about debts they didn't owe. Their credit card was mysteriously used at several liquor stores across town. Someone kept signing them up for magazine subscriptions and catalog mailing lists. Then came the social media attacks. Fake profiles started appearing, using our photos and spreading lies about our foster family. One claimed Patricia and Robert were abusing us. Another said they were only fostering us for the money. The profiles tagged local news stations and child welfare organizations. Our foster parents had to hire a lawyer to deal with the false allegations. The stress was taking its toll on everyone. Patricia started having anxiety attacks, and Robert was barely sleeping. I overheard them one night discussing whether they could handle this, whether they were putting their own family at risk. The thought of losing another home because of our mother made me physically sick. I started planning contingencies, researching youth shelters and job opportunities. I couldn't let Louis end up in the system because of her vendetta against me. Louis noticed me pulling away and confronted me about it. When I admitted my fears about our foster parents giving up on us, he got angry, not at me, but at our mother. For the first time, I saw real rage in his eyes. The brother who'd always been gentle and forgiving had reached his limit. He started documenting everything. Every weird phone call, every suspicious car driving by slowly, every new rumor at school. He created a file with dates, times, and descriptions. He said if our mother wanted to play games, we needed to be ready with evidence. The breaking point came during Louis's championship soccer game. Our foster parents had hired security for the event just in case. We thought we were prepared. We weren't. She didn't come herself. She was smarter than that. Instead, she sent the man who'd followed me home. He approached Louis during warm-ups, when the security guard was distracted by a commotion on the other side of the field. A commotion our mother had probably orchestrated. He told Louis his mother was dying, that she was in the hospital and desperately wanted to see him one last time. He said I knew about it, but was keeping it from him out of spite. Louis, caught off guard and in front of his teammates, didn't know how to react. I saw the interaction from the bleachers and immediately ran down. By the time I reached them, the man was trying to convince Louis to come with him right now, that there wasn't much time. Louis looked torn, the old programming kicking in despite everything he'd learned. I grabbed Louis and pulled him away, telling the man to leave immediately, or I'd call the police. He sneered and said our mother just wanted to say goodbye to her baby. Then he leaned in close and whispered something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was made Louis go pale. Security finally noticed the commotion and escorted the man out. Louis was shaking. He told me the man had said our mother had pictures of us from foster care, pictures that could get our foster parents in trouble. He'd implied things that made my stomach turn. We told Patricia and Robert immediately. They were horrified but not surprised. Our mother was escalating, getting more desperate and dangerous. They decided we needed to be more proactive about our safety. The next few weeks were a blur of safety measures. Patricia started driving us to and from school. Robert installed an alarm system. We varied our routes and schedules. It felt like we were living in a prison of our mother's making. Dr. Martinez increased Louis's sessions. The psychological warfare was taking its toll on him. He was having nightmares about our mother taking him away, about losing the family we'd built. He started sleeping in my room again, like when we were little. Our foster parents' marriage was straining under the pressure. I heard them arguing one night about whether they'd made a mistake adopting us. Patricia defended us fiercely, but Robert was worried about their biological daughter, Sarah, who was away at college. What if our mother targeted her next? I considered running away. If I disappeared, maybe our mother would follow me and leave Louis and our foster family alone. I even packed a bag and wrote a letter, but Louis found it before I could leave. The betrayal in his eyes when he realized I was planning to abandon him stopped me cold. We had a long talk that night. He made me promise never to leave him, no matter how bad things got. He said we'd survived our mother before, and we'd survive her again, but we had to do it together. He was right, of course. Running would only give her what she wanted, to destroy the family we'd built. The situation reached a crescendo when our mother made her boldest move yet. She showed up at our foster father's workplace, causing a scene in front of his colleagues and clients. She accused him of stealing her children, of turning them against her. Security removed her, but the damage to his professional reputation was done. That evening, our foster parents looked defeated. Robert's boss had suggested he take some time off until the situation was resolved. Patricia's anxiety medication wasn't helping anymore. They loved us, they assured us repeatedly, but they didn't know how much more they could take. I watched the family I'd grown to love crumbling because of one person's vendetta. The woman who'd chosen alcohol over her children now seemed determined to destroy any chance we had at happiness. The rage I'd suppressed for years threatened to boil over. Louis and I made a decision that night. We couldn't keep playing defense. We needed to take control of the situation. We started researching our legal options, looking into harassment charges and civil suits. We documented every incident, built a timeline of her escalating behavior. Our foster parents were touched by our determination to fight back. It seemed to renew their resolve. Patricia said if we could be strong after everything we'd been through, she could be strong too. Robert apologized for wavering and promised we'd get through this as a family. We hired a private investigator to look into our mother's activities. What he found was disturbing. She'd been staying with various men, telling them sob stories about her stolen children. She'd been raising money through online crowdfunding, claiming she needed legal fees to get us back. It was all a scam, of course. The investigator also discovered she'd been in contact with several anti-foster care groups, painting herself as a victim of the system. She'd given interviews to bloggers and podcasters, spreading lies about our foster family. The disinformation campaign was more extensive than we'd realized. Armed with this information, our lawyer filed multiple charges against her: harassment, stalking, fraud, defamation. The list was long. The restraining order violations alone could put her in jail. But she was like a ghost, always one step ahead of being served. The stress was affecting my schoolwork. My grades started slipping, and my guidance counselor called me in for a meeting. When I explained the situation, she was horrified. She connected me with resources and helped me apply for deadline extensions. The school community rallied around us in unexpected ways. Lewis's soccer coach organized a fundraiser to help with our legal fees. Parents who'd witnessed our mother's behavior at games wrote statements for our lawyer. The family counselor who'd intervened that day became a regular source of support, checking in on us weekly. Our mother must have realized the community was turning against her. Her tactics shifted. Instead of public confrontations, she focused on psychological warfare. We'd find things moved in our rooms, subtle signs that someone had been there, nothing stolen, just displaced enough to let us know she could get to us. The security cameras never caught anything. She knew where they were and how to avoid them. It was maddening. We'd report each incident, but without proof, the police couldn't do much. They increased patrols in our neighborhood, but she was too clever to get caught. One morning, Louis found a note in his backpack. Just 4 words: "I'm still your mother." He broke down completely. Despite everything, part of him still craved her love, and she knew exactly how to exploit that weakness. The note was in her handwriting, but there were no fingerprints, no way to prove she'd placed it there. Dr. Martinez worked with Louis on understanding trauma bonds. She explained how abusers create psychological dependencies, how the intermittent reinforcement of love and abuse creates an addictive cycle. Louis intellectually understood, but emotionally, he still struggled with the loss of the mother he'd wanted her to be. Our foster family started attending therapy together. It helped, but the strain was evident. Sarah came home from college for a weekend and was shocked by how much her parents had aged in just a few months. She confronted me privately, asking if her family would ever be normal again. I couldn't lie to her. I told her I didn't know, but that I was sorry her family had been dragged into our mess. She surprised me by hugging me and saying I was her brother now, and family stuck together. It was the first time she'd ever called me brother. The investigation into our mother's finances revealed she owed thousands in back rent and had been evicted from multiple apartments. She was essentially homeless, couch surfing, and living off whatever schemes she could run. The investigator warned us that desperate people do desperate things. His warning proved prophetic. One night, we woke to the sound of breaking glass. Someone had thrown a rock through Lewis's bedroom window. Attached was a note: "You can't hide from me forever." This time, she'd made a mistake. A neighbor's security camera caught a clear image of her throwing the rock. Finally, we had concrete evidence. The police arrested her the next morning at a motel on the outskirts of town. She was charged with vandalism, violating the restraining order, and stalking. Her bail was set high enough that she couldn't pay it. For the first time in months, we could breathe. But even from jail, she found ways to torment us. She called collect multiple times a day until our foster parents blocked the jail's number. She wrote letters full of guilt trips and manipulation. We gave them to our lawyer unopened, building our case. Her public defender tried to argue she was mentally ill and needed treatment, not incarceration. Our lawyer countered with the months of calculated harassment, the evidence of planning and premeditation. The judge wasn't sympathetic to her sob story. As the trial date approached, Louis struggled with whether to testify. Part of him still felt guilty about sending our mother to prison. Dr. Martinez worked with him on understanding that he wasn't responsible for her choices, that protecting himself wasn't betrayal. I testified first, laying out our entire history. The abuse, the neglect, the night she kicked me out at 12. I showed photos of the vandalized locker, played recordings of the threatening calls. I kept my voice steady, refusing to let her see how much she'd hurt me. Louis ultimately decided to testify. His testimony was powerful because it showed his journey from believing her lies to recognizing her manipulation. He cried when he described realizing the mother he dreamed of had never existed. Several jurors wiped away tears. Our foster parents testified about the toll her harassment had taken on their family. Patricia described her anxiety attacks. Robert talked about the damage to his career. Sarah flew in from college to describe how her childhood home had become a fortress. The prosecution presented evidence of our mother's pattern of behavior: the fraudulent fundraising, the false allegations, the systematic campaign to destroy our lives. They painted a picture of a woman who saw her children not as people to love, but as possessions to control. Our mother took the stand in her own defense. She cried and played the victim, claiming we'd been brainwashed by our foster family. She said she just wanted her babies back, that a mother's love could never be wrong. It was a performance, but not a convincing one. During cross-examination, the prosecutor systematically destroyed her narrative. They presented evidence of her continued drinking, her failure to maintain employment, her history of choosing alcohol over her children. When confronted with the note saying "I owed her," she couldn't explain what a child could possibly owe an abusive parent. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison with mandatory psychological treatment. She screamed as they led her away, saying we'd regret this, that she'd never stop fighting for us. But her threats felt hollow now. After the verdict, Louis and I sat in the courthouse parking lot for what felt like hours. Neither of us spoke at first. The weight of what had just happened, of seeing our mother led away in handcuffs, was crushing even though we knew it was necessary. Patricia and Robert gave us space, waiting by their car while we processed everything. Louis finally broke the silence, asking if I thought she'd she'd really get help in prison. I told him honestly that I didn't know, but that wasn't our responsibility anymore. The drive home was quiet. Sarah had to fly back to college that afternoon, but before she left, she pulled both of us into a tight hug. She whispered that she was proud of us, that we were the strongest people she knew. Coming from someone who'd barely acknowledged my existence for years, it meant everything. That night, our foster parents ordered pizza, and we ate together as a family. No one mentioned the trial or our mother. Instead, Robert talked about maybe taking a family vacation over the summer, somewhere none of us had been before. Patricia suggested the beach, and Lewis's eyes lit up. He'd never seen the ocean. The next few weeks were an adjustment. Without the constant threat of our mother's interference, we had to figure out what normal looked like. Louis stopped checking his phone obsessively, no longer expecting texts or calls from her. I stopped looking over my shoulder when walking home from school. Dr. Martinez continued working with Louis, but the sessions became less about crisis management and more about healing. She helped him understand that loving someone didn't mean accepting their abuse, that he could grieve the mother he'd wanted while still protecting himself from the mother she actually was. My grades slowly improved as I could finally focus on schoolwork without constant anxiety. My guidance counselor connected me with scholarship opportunities, saying my story of resilience would make me a strong candidate. For the first time, college felt like a real possibility, rather than a distant dream. Patricia's anxiety attacks stopped completely. She weaned off her medication under her doctor's supervision, saying she felt safer than she had in months. Robert's boss welcomed him back to work full-time, and several colleagues apologized for doubting him during our mother's smear campaign. The community support continued even after the trial. Lewis's soccer coach kept checking in, making sure he was doing okay. Parents who'd witnessed our mother's behavior would stop Patricia at the grocery store to ask how we were doing. It felt like